Argentina seizes the Falklands after a brief gun battle. The Argentine flag is flying tonight over the capital, Port Stanley. The president says, "We didn't invade, we just recovered our territory." Mrs. Thatcher called it unprovoked aggression and broke off diplomatic relations. And she's ordered a naval task force to prepare for action against Argentina. Good evening. The government is tonight facing the prospect of using force if it's to win back the Falkland Islands. Argentine troops invaded the islands at 10:30 our time this morning after 150 years of British rule. The Royal Marines and local defenders had orders not to surrender, and there were clashes, during which 3 invaders are said to have been shot. It's believed there were no British casualties. Calling the invasion an act of unprovoked aggression, Britain has broken off diplomatic relations with Argentina. There's no state of war, but a British nuclear-powered submarine and other ships are already on their way to the South Atlantic from Gibraltar, and a task force, including 2 aircraft carriers, is being assembled at Portsmouth. But the order to sail south hasn't yet been given to allow time for diplomatic pressure, chiefly perhaps from President Reagan, who tried to persuade the Argentines from invading and is now pressing them to withdraw. The UN Security Council has met in emergency session, while in London the Cabinet is in its 3rd meeting of the day, though it took the government nearly 8 hours to confirm that the invasion had in fact occurred. Opposition criticism at Westminster has so far been muted, but there's been complaint that Britain's response has been too little and too late. The Commons meets tomorrow morning, the first time it'll have done so on a Saturday since Suez in 1956, something of the measure of the crisis. Here's Keith Graves.
The 15-line telex received in London this morning confirmed the government's worst fears, not only because of the plight of those on the islands, but because it took that message to persuade many people in Whitehall that the Argentines meant business, and by then it was too late. This was the dramatic message that told the outside world that Britain was on the verge of armed conflict, because that is the situation tonight, and many senior members of the government are resigned to it. The London telex operator got through after hours of trying and asked Port Stanley, "What are all these rumours?" Back came the cryptic reply, "We have lots of new friends." "What about invasion rumours?" said London. "Those are the friends I was meaning," answered the anonymous islander, 7,000 miles away. "They've landed?" asked London. "Absolutely," was the reply. And then came this exchange. "Are you open for traffic?" Reply, "No orders on that yet. One must obey orders." Question, "Whose orders?" Answer, "The new governor." Question, "Argentina?" Answer, "Yes." Question, "Are the Argentinians in control?" Answer, "Yes." You can't argue with thousands of troops plus enormous navy support when you're only 1,800 strong. And then a final "Stand by, please," and the line was cut. And that was the last time London had contact. It became apparent to most people last night that Argentina meant business. Our ambassador, Anthony Williams, was called to see Costa Mendez, the Argentine foreign minister, in Buenos Aires. He rejected Britain's plan to defuse the dispute diplomatically and gave Mr. Williams a blunt ultimatum: acknowledge Argentina's sovereignty over the Falkland Islands overnight, or else. And as that telex showed, he meant it. Lord Carrington had been playing the dispute down, and now it may be too late for diplomacy.
What we must do is to get world opinion mobilized as best we can to put pressure on the Argentines. I mean, President Reagan has tried last night for us and didn't succeed, but we must go on doing it. But I don't think that one should be too optimistic, but we've got to try.
If we're not optimistic about that, could I turn to you, Mr. Knott? Are we now planning some sort of military response to this?
Well, last night, when it became clear that there was an imminent invasion of the Falkland Islands likely, we were not clear about that until yesterday. We placed the Royal Navy in a state of readiness to move, and there is a very substantial task force now being prepared, and that is the position so far as the Royal Navy is concerned with the surface fleet in the United Kingdom. But we have had a considerable number of ships at sea for some period of time, and of course Endurance has been down in that part of the world.
Endurance is not likely to be able to do very much, I'm sure you'd agree. There are reported to be 15 Argentinian naval vessels in their
Yes.
task force.
Yes.
So could I ask you again, are we preparing a military response? And are you going to give the order for that task force to sail? You're only preparing it at the moment.
We're preparing a naval task force which is large enough and powerful enough to deal with any problems that it might meet in the South Atlantic. We have not yet given the orders for that task force to sail, and that is a matter we will be considering. But it is in preparation, and it will be large and very substantial. And it would join up, if need be, with other naval forces which are already at sea.
We could find ourselves, presumably, fighting a naval battle. Do you think it's going to come to that? And would you be prepared to give the order?
Although I'm the Defense Secretary, I'm always in the business of trying to maintain peace. I don't see it as my function to fight a war if I don't have to, and therefore, rather than answer such a hypothetical question, I would say we are preparing ourselves to sail a very substantial and large fleet, which will look very impressive and be very powerful indeed. But I still hope, as the Foreign Secretary said, that we can manage to find a diplomatic answer to this.
And if not, you just use the phrase to fight a war, we might find ourselves in that situation.
I hope not.
But we might.
It's always conceivable.
Well, the feeling in Whitehall tonight is that there's no way the military rulers of Argentina can back down, and so a military confrontation, a naval battle, in fact, is inevitable. That, though, is at least 2 weeks and probably more away because of the distances involved. Britain is putting together a task force, and that apparently late reaction to the crisis that had been building for several weeks is one question that will eventually have to be answered. Of more immediate concern, though, is the position of the islanders and the Royal Marines with them. Defence Secretary Nott was emphatic tonight that they would not have surrendered, which has led to speculation of a battle. But another report within the last hour has suggested that the Marines and the governor are being flown to Buenos Aires. The answer is that Whitehall simply doesn't know exactly what's going on.
For the people of the Falklands, just under 2,000 of them, it's been their first day under Argentine rule. Argentina has named a governor for the islands and has said she'll respect the Falklanders' lives, property and rights, all of which they may well view with some scepticism. Nick Witchell has been following the day's events on the disputed islands in the Atlantic.
It was shortly before daybreak in the Falklands when the invasion began, at about 10:30 our time. Argentine assault craft approached the Falklands group from the east. It's thought about 500 soldiers landed from assault craft near the small airport, about 3 miles northeast of the capital, Stanley. According to the Argentines, the airfield was secured, more troops and armoured cars were then flown in, and the force moved on into Stanley. The Foreign Office in London had been in touch with the governor of the Falklands throughout the night, but suddenly at about 10:30 this morning, all radio communication stopped. One of the British ice patrol vessels in the South Atlantic picked up a garbled message that the governor's house had been surrounded. How sustained the resistance was isn't clear. The Argentine admission that 3 of their men were injured is proof that there were some clashes. But faced with an Argentine naval force of such size, some 15 vessels, including submarines, destroyers, and an aircraft carrier, and a reported 2,000 Argentine troops, it would appear that the garrison of 80 Royal Marines was ordered not to offer unnecessary resistance. There's a report that the Argentines are now intending to ship the Marines out of the islands together with the governor and his wife. Throughout the afternoon, all efforts to get in touch with the islands have failed. The only independent account of the invasion has come from a radio ham somewhere in the Falklands who gave the BBC this description.
Approximately 9:30 GMT. They believed to have come ashore in landing craft and then stormed the town of Port Stanley. And they stormed the town of Port Stanley. And then they brought in heavy armoured vehicles. Heavy armoured vehicles, details I don't know. And then they took over the government house. And then they've taken over all of Port Stanley. And now they're also in control of the local broadcast station. And I believe this, I'm not 100% sure on Alan, I believe they shut up the cable and wireless transmitter station.
A radio ham in the Falklands describing the invasion. In Argentina, the news of the takeover has been received with wild enthusiasm. Christopher Wayne is in Buenos Aires, where he witnessed these scenes.
Argentina hasn't experienced this kind of national jubilation since she won the World Cup. The crowds have been out in their scores of thousands. The blue and white of Argentina is on every balcony and in every window. Malvinas Argentina, say the placards, and motorists have been pounding the same theme on their car horns. For President Leopoldo Galtieri, it's a remarkable turnabout. 3 days ago, police fired on anti-government demonstrators. Today, he can do no wrong. His broadcast to the nation was statesmanlike, but to many Argentines, unnecessary. Everyone knows the Falklands belong to Argentina, they argue, so why bother to explain ending the illegal British presence? Inside the government offices, the atmosphere is more serious. It was here the invasion was planned and publicly forecast a month ago. The one thing the Argentines cannot understand is why London should have been taken by surprise.
This is the magazine 7 Days, published yesterday and selling in Buenos Aires like hotcakes. The cover shows an Argentine flag flying over the capital of the Falklands, Port Stanley. And the headline reads, "Argentina gets back the Malvinas." Inside the magazine, there's a description of a 10-day military operation. There's even a mock-up of the London Times, and its front page shows how the British press would report this invasion. Like all military operations dreamed up by journalists, this one is completely successful.
The claim that the Falklands are Argentine is drummed into every schoolchild. It's almost the only issue which completely unites Argentina. Political unrest, a tough military regime, raging inflation and high unemployment are all forgotten. The official maps show the Falklands as the offshore part of the country's Sector 14. It's just part of Argentina's claim. They also say they own South Georgia and the British Antarctic Territory. The newspapers here say the invasion force of 3,000 assault troops included an army general designated as the new governor and an English-speaking administrative staff. Clearly, the hope is that an overwhelming show of force, coupled with promises to protect the Falklanders' human rights and livelihood, will be enough to allay fears and satisfy the British government. It's true that diplomats had been discussing a possible leaseback, conceding the Falklands to Argentina, but then allowing the islanders possession for another 50 years. But that suggestion was unacceptable to a regime determined to take back the islands by force if need be. The government here had pledged that the dispute would be finally resolved by tomorrow at the latest. But the real problems may be just about to begin.
Christopher Wayne, reporting from the Argentine capital, Buenos Aires. The mood here in London, and in Whitehall particularly, was very different. Confusion until the invasion was confirmed, and crisis while the government decided what to do. The first emergency cabinet meeting this morning was attended by the Chief of the Air Staff and the First Sea Lord. When it ended after an hour, Mrs. Thatcher went to the Commons, where MPs were told of the worsening crisis. The Prime Minister had decided during the night to hold the meeting, and she abandoned plans to stay overnight at Windsor, where she had dined with the Queen. As ministers were getting a full report from Lord Carrington, the Foreign Secretary, the Foreign Office was told by the Governor of the Falklands there had been no invasion. On the basis of that message, Lord Carrington's deputy made a statement in the Commons.
Over the past 24 hours, the situation has become increasingly grave. There is now a real expectation that an Argentine attack against the Falkland Islands will take place very soon. It was for this reason that we sought an emergency meeting of the Security Council yesterday and associated ourselves immediately with a request from the President of the Security Council that both Britain and Argentina should exercise restraint and refrain from the use or threat of force and continue the search for a diplomatic solution.
Crowds had gathered in Downing Street by the time the Prime Minister drove back from the Commons. She had cancelled all other engagements for the day and will be staying at number 10 over the weekend instead of going to Chequers.
Mrs. Thatcher, do you have a statement to make to us on the Falkland Islands?
When Parliament meets tomorrow for its first Saturday session in 25 years, MPs are going to want answers to a lot of questions from the Prime Minister and from the Defence Secretary, John Nott. Throughout the mounting crisis of the past weeks, MPs have been given the impression by ministers that the Falkland Islands incident was not much more than a little local difficulty. And even after one MP declared today that there'd be shame and ridicule for Britain if the islanders had to suffer the humiliation of surrender, the Lord Privy Seal replied that the threat had been there for 15 years and that any invasion wouldn't be easy. Not long afterwards came the first reports that the invaders had taken over, but for several hours all British sources refused to acknowledge the fact, and the Commons was allowed to adjourn for the day. Although there was support for the government's action in calling a special session of the United Nations, this is certain to be translated into bitter recrimination during tomorrow's debate. Labour spokesman John Silkin gave his first reaction.
I do think they should have been much more prepared. I do believe that the indications of that tin-pot fascist junta in the Argentine, they always do this sort of thing when they're having trouble at home, and that, I think, should have been much more apparent. I believe also that they were wrong in giving the impression, perhaps, that maybe didn't intend to do it, that we were not as serious in defending our responsibilities in the area as we should have been. But as I say, this isn't the moment. The moment is to stand firm with our own people in the Falkland Islands and with our forces who are engaged.
Now the Labour leader, Michael Foot, will be ready to launch a full-scale attack on the government for failing to be prepared, as the Labour government was some years ago. That view is likely to be echoed by Conservative backbenchers who have always been resolute in the need for Britain to defend these distant islands. The former Foreign Secretary, Dr. David Owen, was gloomy about hopes of reclaiming the Falkland territories.
I think it's going to be extremely difficult to get this back. If they've got forces on the island, they will also have air cover, they'll have ships in the area. Even if we now make a major demonstration of naval forces, it's going to be extremely difficult to get these back. The tragic error was not to deploy naval forces down there at the end of February and early March, when there was ample warning that the situation was flaring up. This is exactly what we did 4 years ago. We did it, in fact, to total secrecy. The Argentinians probably never knew that the force was there. And then when we were able to negotiate with them, we were negotiating with the knowledge, and I had the knowledge that I had naval forces behind me. But I do want to warn people against a belief that Britain can now simply reinvade the islands and get them back. It's going to be mighty difficult to do it, and I think it's going to be the main emphasis now will have to go on diplomacy, getting the maximum pressure. I suspect that only the American administration and President Reagan has any chance of being listened to by this Argentinian junta. I'm not sure they will be. It's a very vicious, nasty government with no respect of human rights. They've obviously made a deliberate decision, and there's no chance of them giving this up without a very bitter fight.
But that bitter fight seems to be accepted as a real prospect. In fact, some ministers are even admitting privately that unless the invaders are defeated, the very survival of the government could be at risk. There's already been speculation that Lord Carrington and John Knott might have to resign, but tonight they were at another crisis cabinet meeting, preparing for the verbal battle in Parliament and the more distant battle for the Falkland Islands.
Noel Lewis, our political correspondent. Argentina has waited 150 years to gain, or as it has it, to regain the Falklands. The claim to the Falklands has been a regular rallying cry, particularly at times of economic crisis. Such a crisis exists in Argentina at present, with inflation at around 150% and the peso drastically devalued. President Galtieri, who came to power in December, is a general-turned-politician whose government does have a slightly better record than its predecessors in human rights, but not much. Thousands of opponents of the junta have disappeared over the last few years. But the fact that it is a far-right military dictatorship hasn't prevented Argentina from getting the diplomatic backing today of the Soviet Union, and Britain, as an ex-colonial power, has an uphill struggle in getting help from third world countries in a forum like the United Nations. Tonight at the UN, the Security Council has been meeting in emergency session. Here's Martin Bell from New York.
The British, who are permanent members of the Security Council, have called the second emergency session on the Falkland Islands within 24 hours. They've urged the Council to condemn the invasion and to demand that the troops from Argentina be withdrawn. So far, it's been a lonely protest, but a forceful one. The Security Council, preoccupied with other emergency resolutions on Central America and the West Bank, has had to set them aside to consider this latest threat to peace. No one spoke except the Argentinians and the British had most to say.
As we sit here, a massive Argentine invasion of the Falkland Islands is taking place. Mr. President, I cannot find words strong enough to express my government's condemnation of this wanton act of armed force. It is a blatant violation of the United Nations Charter and of international law.
Ambassador Roca of Argentina said his country was exercising the right of self-defense. Argentina was ready to negotiate, he said. The British, not surprisingly, insisted on their right of reply.
The whole population of the Falkland Islands could nearly be accommodated in the public gallery of this chamber. I think it is fortunate for them that they have not chosen to be here today, because I doubt if they would extract much consolation regarding their own present and future status from the remarks which we have just heard from my distinguished colleague from Argentina.
The debate is adjourned as the British now look for support in the Security Council. The Spanish-speaking countries they expect will go with Argentina. The Africans they think they may enlist. And the British ambassador hasn't given up hope of getting the Council to condemn the invasion before the day is out. But even if it does, what then? Bilateral diplomacy between Britain and Argentina has failed, and there's no sign of United Nations diplomacy being any more effective, especially since many United Nations members are reluctant to speak up for a British colony. There is a certain amount of sympathy for the British case in the halls of the UN, but it's highly unlikely to find effective expression.
The British government has tonight more or less resigned itself to the idea then that the crisis may only be resolved by military intervention. Bases throughout Britain are hurriedly being prepared for action. But what exactly can Britain do to retrieve the Falkland Islands? Our defence correspondent, Christopher Lee, looks at the possibilities.
Last Friday, this sort of confrontation was far from the Defence Ministry's mind. So much so that the Chief of the Defence Staff, Admiral of the Fleet, Sir Terence Lowen, went off to New Zealand on a 7-day tour. Well, this Friday, Ministry officials appeared extremely harassed, and one insider admitted that there was an air of chaos. It's certainly been a day of furious activity. One group of warships is already at sea, heading for the Southern Ocean, and the Navy's latest aircraft carrier, the Invincible, is to take on board Harrier jump jets. Another carrier, HMS Hermes, will embark seeking helicopters. Hermes can also carry Royal Marines. Both ships will be at the centre of the major task force now being assembled. At RAF Lynham in Wiltshire, Hercules transport planes have been taken off throughout the day. The Defence Ministry won't say where they're headed, but the Hercules are used to transport equipment and soldiers, including paratroops. But it would appear that the major force will be ships and Marines. Further south at Devonport, Royal Marines from the headquarters of the 3rd Commando Brigade have been busy throughout the day going over equipment and checking movement orders and signals. The problem is how to get them to the Falklands. Flying is difficult and going by sea takes time. There's a strong rumour that the special boat section of the Royal Marines, their equivalent to the SAS, is to take part in the operation. The Marines know the islands better than any other British troops. Until now, they've never been considered a major fighting force in the islands, even along with the local defence force, as a former Falklands governor explains.
Well, they've always been regarded really as a tripwire force, that if they are engaged, then of course the invader is engaging Her Majesty's forces. They're mainly there to cope with any minor incursions or sudden incursions, unpremeditated incursions, unannounced incursions, with the idea of maintaining a defensive posture until such time as help can come. And also, another very important of their functions is to maintain communications in the event of emergency with the UK so the governor can communicate.
The Marines have always carried out exercises on the islands, but as they would be the first to agree, there's a big difference between purple smoke and thunder flashes and the real thing. The 80 or so in the Falklands today could not have been expected to repel the Argentine troops. Well, can Britain get back the Falklands with what the Defence Secretary John Knott calls this very substantial force? The first aim is to safeguard the lives of the 1,800 islanders, so if there's to be fighting, then it must be at sea. Certainly the force Mr. Knott is assembling today will be impressive. Unfortunately, there are those who will say that even smaller force should have been there last Friday.
And now to other news. The outspoken chairman of the Central Electricity Generating Board, Glyn England, has finally fallen out with the government. He won't be invited to serve a second term in office when his contract runs out next month. It amounts to a sacking. In the past, Mr. England has criticised the government, particularly over its treatment of nationalised industries. Our Labour correspondent, Martin Aidney, asked him if he had lost his job because of high prices.
No, I would say quite categorically that prices of electricity next year are higher than the generating board would have wished them to be, because the Secretary of State has insisted on holding rigidly to a financial target that in the board's view is inappropriate to present circumstances.
So you think it's government interference, is it, which is keeping prices as they are?
I find it very difficult to find an example where a minister's decision has helped the efficiency of this organization. It's not difficult to find examples where ministerial decisions have increased our inefficiency, and that is a penalty to the customer.
Well, whatever the fine print about renewal of contracts, Mr. England has effective...
Oh, I'm sorry, we seem to have lost that. Two High Court judges have ruled that a West Yorkshire coroner has no power to hold an inquest into the death of the British nurse Helen Smith because she died abroad. Helen's father brought the appeal when the coroner, Philip Gill, refused to hold an inquest. But after today's hearing, Mr. Gill said he was pleased and relieved that his understanding of the law had been confirmed. But Mr. Smith hasn't given up.
We could appeal against this judgment, but I quite honestly think it will be a fruitless exercise.
So where does your
I would like
campaign
to say
go
that
now?
as from now on, as from this date, it is now attrition. And I and my colleagues have, for the last 3 years, as conditioned idiots in this present English system that we have abided by the law and done anything in a true and proper British way. As from now on, as from this judgment today, which is now the law of England, it is attrition.
A special branch officer in the Royal Ulster Constabulary has been found not guilty of the murder of a fellow policeman. A judge ruled that it would be dangerous to convict Sergeant Charles McCormick because of the evidence against him coming from a Republican informer. But McCormick was found guilty on 4 other charges, including one of robbing a bank, and he was jailed for 20 years. And we've got some soccer results tonight. Division 1, Liverpool 1, Notts County 0. Division 2, Barnsley 3, Rotherham United 0. Division 3, Plymouth Argyle 1, Newport County 2. And Division 4, Halifax Town 4, Stockport County 1, Scunthorpe United 2, Colchester United 1, Wigan Athletic 4, York City 2. And the headlines tonight on the Falklands Crisis. The Prime Minister has called the invasion of the islands unprovoked aggression. She broke off diplomatic relations with Argentina and has ordered a naval task force to assemble at Portsmouth. The Commons will sit tomorrow in emergency session, the first time it's done so on a Saturday since the Suez Crisis. On the Falkland Islands themselves, there's no news of the British Marines or of the governor. The Argentines have appointed their own governor. And finally, back to the people of the Falkland Islands themselves. For 200 years, they've viewed Britain as their country. In many ways, they're more British than the British. A few months ago, Bob Langley asked them how they'd feel if Argentina annexed the island.
My feelings about the Argentine claim is that they have no claim at all. These islands were discovered by the British, they were inhabited by the British, and they are British.
But would it really matter to you if the Argentines took over?
It would matter to me, yes. And not only to me, but there's all the generations of youngsters to come.
Dictatorship government, freedom would go, which we have got here now. 2,000 people disappear in 1 year. What would 1,800 people be to them?
You're talking about the people who are reputed to have disappeared because of the secret police in Buenos Aires, is what you mean there?
Yeah.
You think they would bring a reign of terror here?
I should think so.
We'd have nothing else but military troops all around the town, under the point of a gun. We've never lived on this. We've lived in complete freedom all our lives, and we've no intention of living under the point of a gun.
The people of the Falkland Islands tonight. And that's it from us tonight, though, of course, if there are any further developments, we'll bring them to you during the evening. Good night.